Hey guys, Richard Petrie here, and I just want to go through question of the week. And this week's question is actually not one I want to answer. The question is, should I put my photo on my website? And I notice a lot of you don't put your photo on the website, you like to hide. So I don't want to answer that question because I actually want to answer a much bigger question, a much more important question than that. And you'll pretty much see my answer by answering the bigger question. So if that's simple enough, let's get into it.
I'll never forget when we were doing a workshop with a group of clients and I said, sit back, let me tell you a story. And physically everybody went back into their seat and there were these huge sighs. Almost like it was story time on the mat at school. And that's the funny thing about stories. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. It's a very powerful little lesson, and every time I do it, it kind of reminds me how important stories are. So there's a good quote, if the lion doesn't tell a story, the hunter will. So your job is to be the winner. History is written by the winners, and it's important to tell a story. It doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter how scared you are of the profile. Stories aren't just for Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Richard Branson. They're for everybody, and they're very, very powerful. Here's an example of a story, and this guy picked up his violin, went into the Washington DC metro station on a cold day in January 2007, and he played 6 Bach pieces for about 45 minutes. And during that time, approximately 2,000 people went through the station, and most of them on their way to work. After 3 minutes, a middle-aged man noticed there was a musician playing. He was the first man to notice. He slowed his pace, stopped for a few seconds, and then continued on with his schedule. He was late. After 4 minutes, the violinist received his first dollar. A woman threw money in the box, but continued walking. At 6 minutes, a young man leaned against the wall to listen to him. Then he looked at his watch and started to walk off again. At 10 minutes, a 3-year-old boy stopped and his mother tugged him along hurriedly as the kid stopped to look at the violinist. Finally, the mother pushed him hard and the child had to continue walking on, turning his head all the time just to look back to see the violinist. This action was repeated by several other children, and every parent without exception forced them to move on. At 45 minutes, the musician played on. Only 6 people stopped and stayed for a while, and about 20 gave him money but continued to walk at their normal pace. He collected $32. At 1 hour, he finished playing. Silence took over. No one noticed, no one applauded, nor was there any recognition. No one knew this, but the violinist's name was Joshua Bell. He was one of the best musicians in the world. He played one of the most intricate pieces ever written, with a violin worth $3.5 million. 2 days before, Joshua Bell had sold out the theatre in Boston where seats averaged over $100.
Okay, so what was missing? Well, I'll tell you. What was missing was the story. The people who'd been and paid over $100 a ticket the 2 nights before, they knew the story. So when they were listening at the Opera House or the Music Centre, they knew the story, and it made the whole experience completely different. The people going through the subway, just walking past, didn't know the story. And because they didn't know the story, they didn't understand the value of what it was they were experiencing. If they knew the story, you can bet your bottom dollar people would have stopped, and he probably would have received more money, even though he probably didn't need it. I heard another story similar to that, actually, where Paul McCartney did the same thing. He dressed up, so you couldn't tell it was Paul McCartney from the Beatles. Did the same thing. In an hour, he made about $30 as well, playing the songs on a guitar, just himself. So you take away the Beatles story, you're not left with a lot. So, and I think for a lot of people's businesses, when you're an expert at what you do, the only people that really know it are your peers, and they're never going to buy off you. It's the other people who do the same job you do. They know what's good and what's not. A lot of your clients don't really know. Everybody's work looks pretty good. So the stories are the things that elevate your value, and you have to be clever about how you do it, and you've got to work out what your key messages are and embed those into the story. But stories are so powerful. Stories are transformational in terms of helping you attract people to you and sell your stuff. Okay, So here's a second story, and this is a guy that did understand the power of story. This is an example where a guy has used a story. Now, this is another extreme example, because even though he's used a story in a very short amount of time to get himself a job, you'll be stunned at the story. It's starting to get very noisy here. So let's go into the second story.
And here it is. This was he placed this ad in the newspaper. Headline: Former marijuana smuggler. It's quite hard to read, so I'll read it out for you. Having successfully completed a 10-year sentence, incident-free for importing 75 tons of marijuana into the United States, I'm now seeking a legal and legitimate means to support myself and my family. Business experience. Owned and operated a successful fishing business. Multi-vessel, 1 airplane, 1 island, and a processing facility. Simultaneously owned and operated a fleet of tractor-trailer trucks conducting business in the western United States. During this time, I also co-owned and participated in the executive level management of 120 people worldwide in a successful pot smuggling venture, with revenues in excess of $100 million annually. I took responsibility for my actions and received a 10-year sentence in the United States, while others walked free for their cooperation. Attributes. I'm an expert in all levels of security, as you would be. I have extensive computer skills and personable, outgoing, well-educated, reliable, clean and sober. I've spoken in schools to thousands of kids and parents groups over the past 10 years on the consequences of choice, and received public recognition from the RCMP for community service. I'm well travelled and speak English, French and Spanish. References available from family, the US District Attorney, friends, family and the US District Attorney. So here's a guy with I think it's a great story, but he's using his story, even though it's a highly dodgy story, and this guy was flooded with jobs. He actually ended up becoming quite famous. He ended up running his own TV program, in fact, and all stemmed apparently from this ad. So he was obviously smart enough to capitalise on it. But the point is, in the previous example, Joshua Bell was without his story, and it was a great story. This guy was with a story, and it was a questionable story, but still, the story is everything. So if the question is, do I have my photo on my website? The answer is pretty obviously yes, but you need more than your photo. What's the story? Why did you set up in business? What's the story behind, what is it you do that's special for people? And what's the story behind how you managed to discover the special ways and techniques that allow you to get results that maybe no one else can? These are all they're worth money to you. Say worth money, it sounds a bit tacky, but they are of interest to people and they attract people, and when people are attracted to, obviously it becomes easy to do business. So that's my answer to a very simple question, probably a slightly deeper answer than you're expecting, but I hope you enjoy this concept of stories. It's very, very important. This is just a snapshot into it. But what's your story, and are you telling it? What do you have on your website? Are you telling your story? Are you hiding? So I say, get out, come out into the open, tell your story. That's what people love. We all love stories. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this short little training, and I'll speak to you soon.